The church organ let out a low, bruised note that vibrated through my ribs like a warning I couldn't salute away. Lilies crowded the air, sweet, heavy, almost rotten at the edges, and the polished wood of my mother's casket threw back the stained glass light in thin, wavering bands. I stood in my dress blues with my hands folded exactly where they were supposed to be. Fingers still, spine straight, jaw set the way the Navy had taught me to set it when my body wanted to break formation. Behind me, whispers moved through pews like a draft. Libby? Is that her? After all these years? I didn't turn. I didn't give the town my profile like a confession. The chapel was smaller than memory. The aisle felt too short, the ceiling too low, the cross too close, as if the whole building leaned in to judge what had already been decided decades ago. My husband, Mark, stood half a step behind my right shoulder. His hand hovered near my back without touching, the way a good partner stayed close without claiming your fight. He wore a dark suit and the calm face of a man who had seen emergencies and learned how to keep his voice low in rooms full of grief. I stared at the brass handles on the casket and imagined my mother's hands. Soft, always busy, folded inside. I'd practiced what I would say to her, but the words kept slipping away under the weight of the room. I leaned in just enough that my breath fogged the glossy surface. "I'm here, Mom," I whispered. 6 words. All I had. The organ shifted, a new chord rolling out, and the sound covered the small break in my voice. That was when I felt it, the cold gaze that had ruled my childhood like weather. I turned. My father stood at the end of the front pew, rigid in a black suit that fit him like a uniform he'd never earned. His hair was grayer than I remembered, but his posture was the same. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes narrowed like the world was always one step away from embarrassing him. He looked at my dress blues the way some men looked at a stain. Then his mouth curved, not into a smile, into a correction. "So," he said, voice pitched low but sharp enough to cut, "you came back." 5 words. The town fell quieter around him, like everyone leaned in without moving. I kept my hands folded. I kept my breathing even. She was my mother. 4 words, a fact, not a plea. His eyes flicked to my ribbons. Still parading? 2 words, a sneer. Mark shifted behind me just a fraction. I felt his presence like ballast. I didn't flinch. I'm here to mourn. 5 words, simple. True. My father's gaze moved past me to the casket, and for a moment his expression softened, until it hardened again, as if softness was an indulgence he refused to pay for. "She asked about you," he said, like an accusation. "Every day." 4 words, and the way he said them made my throat tighten, because he made it sound like my mother's love had been a burden. I held his eyes. "Then why didn't you call?" 6 words. Quiet, steady. His jaw worked. "You chose your path." 4 words. Blame polished. The organ swelled again, and the sound saved me from answering with my hands instead of my voice. A woman I barely recognized, older now, hair sprayed into place, pressed past us toward the front. Her perfume mixed with the lilies, sharp and floral, and she murmured to my father, "Pastor's ready." My father didn't move. His eyes stayed on me like he was measuring how much of me he could still control. He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Learn your lesson?" 3 words. Small. Cruel. For a beat, I was 16 again, standing in a doorway with a backpack strap cutting into my shoulder and a future that didn't have a bed in it. I felt my stomach tighten the way it used to when I heard his keys hit the counter, when I knew the house rules were about to become a sentence. I forced my voice into calm. "I learned who you are." 5 words. No heat. Just truth. His nostrils flared. "Watch your mouth." 3 words, an old command. I didn't raise mine. "Watch your pride." 3 words, a new boundary. His eyes flashed, and I saw the anger he always hid behind discipline. He loved discipline when it belonged to him. He hated it when it belonged to me. Mark stepped up beside me then, not blocking me, just standing close enough that my father had to see I wasn't alone. My father's gaze slid to him, dismissive. Who's this? 2 words. Dismissal in the shape of a question. Mark's voice stayed steady. Mark Reyes. 2 words. No flex? My father looked back to me like Mark was a prop I'd brought to prove something. Cute. 1 word. Cheap. I didn't take the bait. The chapel felt too tight, too full of history, and my mother's casket sat between us like a judge who couldn't speak. The pastor's microphone squeaked softly as he adjusted it, high and brief, and the sound snapped the room back into ceremony. My father stepped away first, not because he was done, but because he knew the town was watching, and he preferred battles where he held the script. He moved to the front pew and sat, back straight, hands folded, the picture of grieving respectability. I stayed standing, facing the casket. My reflection floated in its gloss. Dark blue fabric, gold buttons, a face older than the girl my father threw out, but still carrying her in the corners of my eyes. The pastor began speaking about Elaine Cole, my mother, as if she were a gentle season the town had survived. People sniffed. Someone's tissue crackled. The organ breathed under his words like a heartbeat. I listened, but my mind kept rewinding to the last time I'd been in this church. Not in dress blues, in a borrowed coat that smelled like someone else's laundry soap, in a body that carried a secret I could feel every time I sat down. I'd been 16 and nauseous and terrified. My boyfriend had vanished like he'd never touched my hand at the skating rink, like he'd never promised anything under the bleachers. In a town like ours, vanishing was easier for a boy. Shame had a way of choosing a gender. I remembered the kitchen at home, the overhead light too bright, the air smelling of pot roast and bleach. My mother's hands had been wet from the sink, fingers red from dishwater. She'd looked from me to my father as if she could will him into mercy. I'm pregnant, I'd said. 2 words, a life sentence. My father's chair had scraped back hard. The sound was violent on the linoleum. No. 1 word, denial. I am, I'd whispered. 2 words. Truth. Trembling. His face tightened, as if my body had personally insulted him. You ruined us. 3 words. Not your future. Us. Reputation. Church. The town's eyes. My mother's voice had cracked. Robert. 1 word, pleading. He cut her off. Out. 1 word, command. I had stared at him, waiting for a second sentence that softened it, waiting for a father to show up. He didn't. He pointed toward the door. Leave. Now. 2 words. Cold. My mother's eyes had filled, but she didn't move. I saw her fear in that moment. Not fear of me, but fear of him. The peacekeeper trapped in her own house. I'd gone to my room and packed without crying. A backpack. A photo of my mother from a summer fair. Her smile wide, hair windblown, a daisy tucked behind her ear. That photo was still in my wallet now, edges worn soft by 2 decades of being carried like a vow. When I came back down the hallway, my father stood by the door with his arms crossed. Dead to me, he said. 3 words, a burial without a casket. My mother made a sound like she'd been struck, but she still didn't step between us. I walked out into a cold evening that smelled like rain on pavement. The porch light buzzed behind me. The door shut with a final, hollow thud that I felt in my teeth. No coat offered. No car keys tossed. No call me. Just the sound of the latch catching. And the silence afterward, the kind that taught me exactly how alone a person could be while still standing in the same town as everyone who judged her. Back in the church, the pastor's voice blurred as my memory released me. My fingers curled once inside my gloves, then relaxed. Mark's hand brushed the side of my arm, 1 brief touch, warm through the fabric, then dropped. A reminder, you're here and you're not 16. The service moved toward prayer, heads bowed like synchronized obedience. I looked at the casket instead. I noticed something I hadn't seen at first. A small daisy pinned near the floral arrangement, its petals slightly wilted, stem wrapped in thin green ribbon. My mother's daisy. My throat tightened. And then I saw my father's hand resting on the edge of the front pew, Fingers near that daisy as if he had placed it there, as if he could claim her gentleness the way he tried to claim my life. The hymn began, soft and familiar, and voices rose around me like a tide. My father didn't sing. He just stared straight ahead, jaw set, as if he were waiting for the moment when the room would belong to him again. I leaned closer to Mark without looking away from the casket. "He's going to make this about him," I murmured. 7 words. Mark's voice was barely a breath. "Then we don't let him." 6 words. I swallowed, tasting Lily's and old anger. My fingers found the edge of my wallet inside my coat pocket and touched the worn photo of my mother, paper against leather, a tiny anchor. The hymn ended. Chairs creaked as people shifted. The pastor invited everyone to the fellowship hall afterward. And as the congregation began to rise, I felt my father's gaze return, sharp, expectant, hungry for control. He stood too, smoothing his suit like he was preparing for a speech. I knew that look. It meant he was about to rewrite history out loud in public, where shame could do its work. I kept my shoulders squared and my chin level, because I hadn't come back as the frightened girl he threw away. I'd come back as the woman who survived him. And I could feel the next confrontation already forming in the aisle, waiting for the first word. The first bench scraped as people stood, and the sound traveled through the chapel like a match being struck. Coats rustled, programs crackled. The organ faded into a thin last breath, leaving the room exposed. Just lilies, murmurs, and the soft squeak of shoes on polished wood. I stayed where I was for a heartbeat longer, eyes on my mother's casket, as if my stillness could hold her here one more minute. Then the aisle began to move. A line formed toward the fellowship hall doors, and the town flowed past me in slow, careful steps. Faces I half remembered looked at my uniform, then away, like my dress blues were either a rebuke or a curiosity. I didn't offer anyone a smile. I didn't offer anyone the old girl they'd agreed to forget. Mark stayed close, quiet as a shadow. My father rose from the front pew with the same deliberate timing he'd always used, waiting until attention would naturally swing toward him. He adjusted his suit jacket, smoothed his tie, and stepped into the aisle as if he were about to lead a procession instead of a lie. He met me at the edge of the casket stand. Up close, I could see the lines around his mouth, carved deep by years of being right in his own head. His eyes moved over my ribbons like he was searching for a flaw he could call out. "You didn't have to wear that," he said. 6 words. His voice stayed low, but it carried the old command. "I did," I said. 2 words, no apology. His gaze slid to Mark, dismissive again. "Family only." 2 words, a boundary he didn't have the right to draw. Mark's voice stayed level. "I'm her husband." 4 words, simple. My father's lip twitched. "Unfortunate." 1 word, cheap. I felt heat rise behind my ribs, then I pressed it down the way I'd pressed down fear in briefing rooms and on flight lines. Rage was what he expected. Control was what he couldn't stand. I turned slightly, angling my body so my shoulder blocked him from the casket. Not aggressively, just enough to make a point. My mother's casket wasn't his stage. A woman in a black cardigan approached, hands clasped tight. Her gray hair was pinned back, her eyes wet but sharp. Mrs. Holloway. She'd taught Sunday school when I was little, back when I still believed adults were safe by default. She looked at me, then at my father, then back at me, and her mouth pressed into a thin line as if she'd decided something. "Libby," she said softly, "Elaine asked me to find you." My father's head snapped toward her. "She doesn't need—" Mrs. Holloway didn't even glance at him. She held out a small manila envelope, worn at the edges, my name written in my mother's careful hand. The sight of that handwriting hit me harder than any insult. It was like hearing a voice you thought was gone, suddenly close enough to touch. My fingers closed around the envelope. The paper felt warm from her hands, slightly soft from age. For a second, I couldn't breathe. "She wanted you to have it in uniform," Mrs. Holloway added. 8 words. A detail that mattered. My father's eyes narrowed, as if even my mother's last decision offended him. "Give it here," he said. 3 words. An order. I pulled the envelope to my chest. No. 1 word. A lock. His jaw tightened. "Don't start." 2 words. A threat pretending to be advice. Mrs. Holloway's voice sharpened, gentle but firm. "This isn't yours, Robert." 5 words. The town rarely spoke to him that way. He stared at her, surprised. Then he remembered where he was, and he forced his face back into grief. "We're all hurting," he said. 3 words. Performance. Mrs. Holloway stepped back, eyes still on me. "She loved you," she whispered. 3 words. Truth I didn't deserve but needed. Then she merged into the crowd. My father leaned in close enough that his cologne crawled into my nose, bright and expensive and wrong. "Don't read that here." 4 words. Another attempt at control. I met his eyes. "You're afraid," I said. 2 words, accurate. His expression flickered. Panic, then anger. "Watch yourself." 2 words, old script. I turned away from him and followed Mark toward the fellowship hall. The hall smelled like coffee, ham, and lemon disinfectant, the same smell it always had after funerals, as if the town tried to sanitize grief into something manageable. Folding chairs scraped across the tile. Someone's spoon clinked against a styrofoam cup. The noise was ordinary, and that ordinariness made my stomach twist. On a long table near the back, my mother's photo sat in a frame with a small daisy tucked beside it, its petals slightly wilted. Someone had placed a guest book and a bowl of mints like death could be soothed with sugar. My father moved through the room shaking hands, receiving condolences, nodding at the right moments. He was good at being seen. He had always been good at being seen. Mark guided me to a corner near a window where weak winter light fell across the floor in pale rectangles. The glass was cold at my shoulder. My hands trembled slightly as I held the envelope, and I hated that, hated any sign my father could read as weakness. "Open it," Mark murmured. 2 words. Steady. I slid a fingertip under the flap. The paper tore with a soft rip that sounded too loud in my ears. Inside was a folded letter, and beneath it a smaller sealed sleeve, clear plastic, something official inside. My mother's letter came first. The pages smelled faintly of vanilla and old drawer wood, like she'd stored it beside her sweaters. Her handwriting flowed across the paper in blue ink, neat and careful, as if she were trying to keep her voice from shaking even on the page. I didn't read it out loud. I couldn't. I read the first line and felt my throat close. "Libby, I'm sorry I didn't leave with you." The room blurred around the edges. The clink of cups turned distant. My pulse thudded in my ears, heavy and slow. Mark watched me, his face open, his eyes steady. He didn't reach for the letter. He let it be mine. I read on, swallowing hard. "He told you to go. I told myself you'd come back. I was wrong." A chair scraped across tile nearby. Someone laughed too loudly, a bright, wrong sound in a room of casseroles and condolences. My fingers tightened on the page until the paper creased. I kept the truth in the hymnal. Page 214. Abide with me. My breath caught. A hymnal. A hiding place in plain sight where my father never looked because he thought church belonged to him by reputation alone. I flipped the page, hands careful. What he did was not discipline, it was fear. And he did it again, later. My skin went cold. "Lib?" Mark whispered. 1 word. Concern. I shook my head slightly. "Don't ask yet. Not here." My eyes dropped to the clear plastic sleeve beneath the letter. I slid it out slowly. The plastic crackled. Inside was a photocopy of a document, folded twice, edges sharp, a consent form. The header was hospital bright and official. I recognized the shape of the paperwork instantly, even though I'd never held it in my hands before, because I'd carried its absence for years. The lines were labeled clinical. Adoption release. Parental consent. My vision narrowed to one part, a signature, my name written in ink, not my handwriting. The pen pressure was wrong, the slant was wrong, the confidence was borrowed, but below it, On a witness line was another signature. Robert Cole, my father. I didn't feel tears. I felt a clean, hollow chill, like stepping into cold water, fully clothed. Mark's hand closed around my forearm, firm, grounding. Is that? I nodded once, slow. My father had always told the town the same story. I'd run off. I'd been wild. I'd thrown my life away. It was an easy story for them to swallow because it made my pregnancy a moral lesson instead of a human life. But this wasn't gossip. This was paper. This was procedure. This was a choice made with a pen. A soft laugh rose across the room, and I looked up to see my father near the coffee urn, surrounded by 3 women I remembered from church. He held a styrofoam cup like it was a prop, and said something that made them nod sympathetically. He caught my gaze from across the hall. For a second, his face went blank. Then he saw the clear sleeve in my hand. The color drained from his mouth, and his eyes sharpened with pure animal calculation. He set his cup down too carefully, as if he didn't trust his hands. And then he started walking toward me. The space between us felt like a hallway from my childhood. Too narrow, too familiar, too full of echoes. Mark shifted beside me, but I lifted a hand slightly, not to stop him from protecting me, just to remind him I had waited 20 years for this kind of truth. I wasn't giving it away. My father stopped an arm's length from me, close enough that I could see the sweat beginning at his hairline, the tiny tremor in his jaw. He lowered his voice. Put that away. 3 words, panic dressed as command. I held the sleeve up slightly, not waving it, not dramatic, just visible enough to make the threat real. You forged me, I said. 3 words. Flat. His eyes flashed. Don't lie. 2 words. Weak. I didn't raise my voice. It's your signature, I said. 3 words. Paper-thin certainty. His nostrils flared. This isn't the place. 4 words. He feared witnesses more than God. I looked around the hall, the tables, the window light, the crowd chewing slowly, talking softly, pretending death was tidy. This was exactly the place. It's her funeral, I said. 3 words, a boundary. My father's gaze darted to Mark, then back to me, but you want money? 3 words, a bribe. I felt something inside me click into a calm I recognized from deployments. The calm that arrived when the mission became clean. I want the truth, I said. 4 words. A demand, not a plea. His face tightened into the old cruelty. You were nothing but trouble. 6 words. A cut aimed at 16. I stared at him, and I thought of my mother's handwriting, I'm sorry, and the hidden hymnal, and the signature that wasn't mine. I didn't let his insult land. I leaned in slightly, just enough that he had to hear me. The hymnal has more, I said. 4 words, a warning. His eyes widened for a fraction, then he had masked it fast. Stop. 1 word, bear. I stepped back, holding my mother's letter and the sleeve like they were weight and weapon both. The plastic crackled softly in my grip. Across the room, someone tapped a spoon against a cup to get attention. A man cleared his throat. The pastor began to move toward the center, preparing to say a few words of remembrance, and I saw my father's posture change. Spine straightening, chin lifting, the same posture he'd worn when he threw me out, when he declared me dead, when he made shame a public law. He was going to speak. He was going to bless himself in front of everyone. My fingers tightened on the clear sleeve until the edges pressed into my skin. Because now I had what he couldn't charm, proof. And I knew where the rest of it was hidden. In a hymnal, in a church that had watched me fall and never offered a hand until my mother finally did, from the grave. My father glanced toward the pastor, then back to me, and his voice dropped to a hiss. If you do this... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I'd heard that threat my whole life. I turned away from him and started walking back toward the chapel doors. Mark fell into step beside me. The tile under my shoes felt slick, as if the building itself wanted me to slip back into obedience. The smell of coffee followed me like a leash. But I kept moving. Because the next thing my mother asked me to do wasn't to forgive. It was to find the truth she'd hidden where my father would never look. and I could feel my father behind me, watching, calculating, afraid. Not of my anger, of my evidence. The chapel was nearly empty when I slipped back in. The air smelled of candle wax and lilies that had started to sour, and the stained glass light lay across the pews in muted colors like bruises. My shoes made almost no sound on the wood, but my pulse still felt loud, a steady drum under my ribs. Mark stayed by the door, watching the hallway, not because he doubted me, because he understood my father. I walked to the pew where I'd sat as a kid, second row from the back, the one with the small gouge in the wood where someone had carved initials years ago. The hymnals sat in their racks, identical and obedient. I found Abide With Me. Page 214. My mother's handwriting echoed in my head. I kept the truth in the hymnal. My fingers slid along the spine until I felt it. An uneven thickness, a stiffness that didn't belong. I eased the hymnal out and opened it carefully. A taped seam, a hidden flap made of folded paper. My throat tightened. I peeled the tape back slowly. The sound was soft, sticky, intimate, like opening a secret that had been waiting a long time to be seen. Inside was another envelope, darker than the first, with my mother's neat writing again. For Libby, not for him. I stared at those words until my vision steadied. Then I opened it. A small stack of documents slid into my hand, heavier than paper should have felt. One sheet had the hospital header again. Another had agency letterhead, professional font, clean margins. There was a photocopy of an ID page. There was a carbon copy receipt. All the pieces of a process designed to look proper. And tucked between them, wrapped in tissue like something fragile, was a tiny plastic bracelet. Hospital bracelet. The kind they put on babies so nobody could pretend they belonged to someone else. The bracelet was faded, but I could still read the printed words, Baby Girl Cole. My breath caught hard enough to hurt. My fingers trembled and the bracelet clicked softly against the paper. Plastic on paper, small and unbearable. The town had always spoken about my pregnancy like it was a shameful rumor. But this was a person. A person my father had erased with ink. Mark stepped closer, his voice barely a breath. Lib? One word. Careful. I didn't look up. He took her, I said. 3 words. Flat, final. I forced myself to keep reading. A letter from the adoption agency to my mother, dated 2 weeks after I'd been thrown out. Mrs. Cole, it began, polite and efficient. We understand there has been family distress. Please confirm that the minor mother's consent was provided without coercion. My stomach turned cold. Under that, another letter, shorter, colder, signed by a caseworker. The consent signature appears inconsistent with prior school records. The room seemed to tilt. They had noticed. Someone had noticed. And still, my baby was gone. I flipped the page and found the detail my brain grabbed like a lifeline and a knife at the same time. A name and a number. Placement coordinator, D. Whitman. A phone number. An office address in the next county. My fingers tightened around the stack until the paper edges pressed into my skin. Behind me, the chapel door creaked. Not loud, not dramatic, but the sound was enough. I turned. My father stood in the doorway. His face was pale in the stained glass light, and for a second he didn't look like the town's righteous disciplinarian. He looked like a man who had just seen his own lie come alive. What did you take? He asked. 4 words. Too sharp. I held the stack closer to my chest. What you hid, I said. 3 words. Calm. He stepped forward. Give it back. 3 words, command. Mark moved between us by a half step. Quiet. Controlled. My father's gaze flicked to him with contempt, then back to me with panic that hardened into anger. That's church property, my father snapped. 2 words. A joke. I didn't raise my voice. It was Mom's, I said. 3 words, the only ownership that mattered. His jaw worked. You don't get to... Stop, I said. 1 word. A line. He lunged with his hand, not a full attack, not theatrical, just a grasping motion. like a man reaching for a wallet he believed was his. His fingers caught my wrist for a second, tight enough to sting. My body went still. Not fear, memory. 16, doorway, backpack, his hand pointing outward. Mark's voice dropped, low and dangerous. Let go. 2 words. My father's grip tightened, then loosened as footsteps sounded in the hall. The pastor's voice drifted closer, cheerful and unaware. Robert, Libby, everything okay? My father released me immediately and smoothed his suit jacket with shaking hands, transforming panic into performance in one practiced motion. Just family, he said. 2 words. Lies. Polished. I tucked the bracelet back into the tissue, slid the documents into the envelope, and held it like a shield. The pastor appeared at the doorway, smile uncertain now, eyes moving between us. The chapel smelled suddenly sweeter, like the lilies were trying to cover what they'd just witnessed. I met the pastor's gaze and kept my voice even. I needed a moment, I said. 5 words. True enough. The pastor nodded slowly. Of course, he said, then glanced at my father. We're about to do the graveside procession. 6 words. Ceremony marching on. My father's eyes stayed on the envelope. Put it away, he hissed. 3 words. No audience for his cruelty. I held his gaze. Not anymore, I said. 2 words. A door closing. He leaned in, voice low, venom controlled. You'll regret this. 3 words. Old threat? I didn't flinch. I already did, I said. 3 words, honest. Then I walked past him. The hallway outside smelled like coffee and disinfectant, and the fellowship hall noise returned in muffled waves, spoons clinking, chairs scraping, people laughing too brightly to avoid the dark. Mark fell into step beside me, steady. My father followed for a few paces, then stopped, as if he didn't dare chase me where witnesses could see the truth on my face. Outside, the winter air hit my lungs sharp. My hands shook only once, then steadied. I opened my car door and sat with the envelope in my lap like a live wire. Mark leaned on the frame, voice quiet. What's the plan? 3 words. Grounding. I stared at the phone number on the agency letter until it burned into my mind. Records, I said. 1 word. The first step. He nodded. Today? 1 word. I looked back toward the church entrance. My father stood just inside the doorway, speaking to someone with his grieving face on, as if he hadn't just grabbed my wrist in a chapel. Today, I said. 1 word, final. I dialed the number with a thumb that didn't tremble. It rang twice. A woman answered with the smooth, careful tone of someone trained to handle human pain without letting it stain her schedule. Whitman and Associates. This is Denise. I kept my voice controlled. I need adoption records, I said. 4 words, simple. There was a pause. Name? 1 word. Libby Cole, I said. 16, coerced consent. 5 words. No embellishment. The silence on the line shifted, no longer routine. Ma'am, Denise said, slower now. Those are sealed. 4 words. A wall. My signature was forged, I said. 4 words, a key, another pause. I heard papers moving, a chair creaking. If there is fraud, she said carefully, there are processes. 5 words, procedure, my language. Tell me, I said. 2 words, she gave me a list, petition for unsealing, fraud affidavit, original hospital file request, and most important, names. She didn't give me the adoptive family, not yet. But she confirmed something that made my skin go cold again. There was a church liaison involved, she said. 6 words. My eyes lifted toward the church doors. My father. Denise continued. If you appear in person, she said, with identification, we can start a formal review. 11 words. I looked at my uniform sleeve, the Navy insignia catching weak daylight. For the first time, I felt the uniform not as armor, but as leverage, a symbol my father had tried to shame, now useful for forcing systems to take me seriously. I'll be there, but see, I said. 3 words, done. When I hung up, my fingers found the hospital bracelet through the tissue, a faint plastic ridge under my thumb. Mark watched me. Do you want me with you? 6 words, offering without pushing. I nodded once. Yes, I said. 1 word. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the distant murmur of the funeral crowd moving toward the cemetery. A car door slammed. Wind rattled bare branches. The smell of exhaust drifted by, sharp and ugly. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. Bring it back. Now. 4 words. I stared at it, then turned the phone face down. Mark's jaw tightened. He's scared. 3 words. I looked at the envelope again. My mother's handwriting, the agency letterhead, the bracelet that proved a baby had existed even if the town pretended she hadn't. He should be, I said. 3 words. Quiet. We followed the procession to the cemetery because my mother deserved that dignity. I stood at the graveside with cold wind pressing against my cheeks, my uniform stiff against my skin, the envelope hidden inside my coat like a heartbeat no one else could hear. My father gave his public grief in measured phrases, voice trembling at the right moments. He talked about my mother's kindness, her faith, her devotion. He did not mention me. He did not mention what he'd done. The town bowed their heads. The pastor prayed. Dirt hit the coffin with a soft, final sound. When it was over, people drifted away in clusters, leaving footprints in the winter grass. My father stayed near the grave, hands clasped, waiting for his chance to corner me again without an audience, but I didn't step toward him. I stepped toward my mother's fresh earth, placed a single daisy on top, its petals trembling in the wind, and whispered, I found it. 3 words. A promise kept. Then I turned and walked away with Mark beside me and the envelope against my chest. Because the next time I faced my father, it wouldn't be in a hallway. It would be in a room where the truth could be spoken out loud with the right people listening. And he would finally learn what he'd taught me at 16 without meaning to. If you throw someone out, you don't get to control what they return with. The adoption office smelled like lemon polish and old carpet, the kind of clean that tried too hard. A framed lighthouse hung behind the reception desk, calm seas, false promise, and a bowl of stale peppermints sat beside a sign that said, please be patient. I stood in my dress blues anyway, shoulders squared, binder under my arm, my mother's envelope pressed flat against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Mark sat beside me, knees still, hands folded. He kept his eyes on the hallway, the way he did in emergency rooms. Quiet vigilance without panic. A door opened. A woman in a gray blazer stepped out and called, Ms. Reyes? I rose. Yes. 1 word. Steady. Her office was small and bright. A desk, a computer, a filing cabinet that looked heavier than it had any right to. The air smelled faintly of printer toner. She gestured for us to sit, then took my ID with careful hands. I'm Denise, she said, records coordinator. She glanced at my uniform, then back to my face. You mentioned fraud. I placed the clear sleeve on her desk, sliding it toward her without dramatics. The plastic made a soft whisper against wood. Forged consent, I said. 2 words. Clean. Denise's eyes tightened as she scanned the page. This is a copy. Yes, I said. Original was hidden. 5 words, but my voice stayed flat. She looked up. Hidden where? 2 words, a small crack of surprise. In a church hymnal, I said. 4 words. The truth sounded ridiculous, even now. Denise exhaled slowly through her nose, then turned to her computer. Keys clicked. The monitor glow painted her face pale. We need to verify identity, she said, procedural. And we need you to complete an affidavit. I nodded. I will. 2 words. She slid a form across the desk. The paper was thick. Official. Affidavit of fraud. Coercion claim. The words looked calm while my stomach clenched. As I wrote, my pen scratched in slow lines. Name, date of birth, address. The same address I'd been punished out of and still carried like a scar. Denise kept typing. The filing cabinet behind her seemed to hum, not with sound, but with stored lives. When I finished, she took the affidavit and placed it in a folder with a controlled motion. "We also need a specimen signature," she said. I signed again on a blank line. My real hand, my real pressure, my real slant. Denise compared it to the forged signature on the copy. Her lips pressed together. "It doesn't match," she said. 3 words, the first confirmation that felt like air. Mark's hand touched my knee briefly under the desk, warm, grounding, then withdrew. Denise glanced at my mother's envelope in my lap. "You said your mother left you documentation." "She did," I said. 2 words. My throat tightened anyway. Denise's gaze softened for a fraction. "I'm sorry." 2 words, human. I didn't answer with words. I answered by holding myself upright. She turned her screen slightly toward me. "This is the case file index," she said. "The contents are sealed. But if there's fraud, we can initiate review and prepare materials for a petition to unseal." I leaned forward just enough to read. A list appeared. Dates, codes, initials. Clinical language that tried to reduce my life into admin. Minor. Mother, Cole, Elizabeth A., infant, baby girl, Cole. Placement, confidential. Consent, executed. Witness, church liaison. My breath caught. "Church liaison," I said. 2 words cold. Denise nodded once. "That's what the file notes say." My fingers tightened around the edge of my chair. "Name." 1 word. Denise hesitated, then clicked into another field. "It lists..." The office phone rang somewhere out in the hall, shrill and distant. Denise paused until it stopped, then spoke as if she were choosing each word carefully. "Robert Cole," she said. 2 words. The room went very still. Even the air felt thinner. Mark's jaw tightened. "Your father." 2 words, quiet. I stared at the screen until the letters stopped looking like letters and started looking like a verdict. My father hadn't just signed a line. He'd inserted himself into the process as a gatekeeper. He'd made the town's shame into paperwork. Denise cleared her throat softly. "There's also an internal note," she said. "A concern flagged by a caseworker." My voice came out low. "Show me." 2 words. She scrolled. Caseworker note. Minor mother appears distressed. Consent may be coerced. Action. Proceed per liaison assurance. My stomach turned cold. "Proceed," I whispered. 1 word. A knife. Denise's face held professional neutrality, but her eyes had changed. "If you petition the court, this supports you." 6 words. A path opening. "What do I need?" I asked. 4 words. Focus. Denise slid a printed list toward me. The paper smelled faintly of toner. Petition to unseal adoption record. Affidavit of fraud. Comparative signature analysis. Request for hospital file. Request for notary journal. Any corroborating witness statements. Witness statements. My mother was gone. The town was full of cowards, but my mother had left me one witness that couldn't be bullied. Paper. I nodded once. "I'll file." 2 words. Denise lowered her voice. "There is something else." 5 words. The kind that made my pulse tighten. I kept my face still. "What?" 1 word. Denise clicked a tab. "A recorded verification call exists," she said. "From the liaison. It's archived." 10 words. I didn't ask her to play it. Not here, not behind closed doors, not without the right ears to hear it. I held her gaze. "Preserve it," I said. 2 words. Denise nodded. "We will." 3 words. Procedure doing its job. When we left the office, the hallway lights felt too bright. The lemon clean smell clung to my uniform like a reminder that systems could be clean and still be wrong. Outside, the winter air hit my cheeks sharp. The parking lot smelled like exhaust and wet asphalt. I stood beside my car for a moment and let my lungs fill, slow. Mark watched me, Ma. Court? One word? Yes, I said. One word, no hesitation. We drove straight to a law office in the county seat, an adoption attorney Denise had listed on her paper. Her name was Nora Vance. She wore her hair in a tight bun and spoke like she didn't waste oxygen on anything that didn't matter. Her office smelled like old books and fresh coffee. Legal pads lay stacked like ammunition. She looked at the documents and listened without interrupting, her eyes sharp. When I finished, she leaned back. "This is one scandal," she said. "One forged consent." 6 words. She understood the shape of it. I nodded. Yes. One word. Nora tapped her pen once. "Good," she said, "because courts hate stories. They love evidence." 9 words. She outlined the plan like a mission brief. 1. File petition to unseal on fraud grounds. 2. Subpoena agency audio archive. 3. Subpoena notary journal and any church-linked communications. 4. Request hospital records and intake notes. 5. Ask for court appointment of a guardian ad litem. Retroactive review of minor consent. My mind latched onto one phrase. Church communications. 2 words. Nora's gaze held mine. "If he used the church as leverage," she said, "we expose the mechanism in public." 14 words. Public. That was the only language my father respected. I asked the practical question. How soon? 2 words. Nora checked her calendar. "Emergency motions can be heard fast," she said, "especially with credible fraud indicators." 12 words. I signed the retainer. The pen felt smooth, controlled. My signature felt like reclaiming a body that had been borrowed without permission. When we stepped back outside, the sky was low and pale, and the wind smelled like snow that didn't commit. Mark touched my elbow lightly. "You're steady," he said. 2 words. "I'm trained," I said. 2 words. And I meant both the Navy and my childhood. On the drive back toward town, my phone buzzed. Dad lit the screen. I didn't pick up. A text followed. "Meet me church office now," 5 words. Mark's voice stayed calm. "Don't." 1 word. I stared at the message. The old part of me wanted to obey, because obedience had once meant less pain. The adult part of me felt something quieter and stronger. "Not alone," I said. 2 words. We drove to the church anyway, but we didn't go through the side door like I used to when I was trying to be unseen. We walked in through the front. The sanctuary was empty now. Chairs sat aligned like obedient teeth. The air smelled of candle wax and lingering lilies. A vacuum cleaner whined somewhere in the back hall. The church office door was cracked open. My father's voice drifted out, tight and furious. "She has no right!" 4 words. Another voice, male, older, answered in a hush. "It's dangerous." 2 words. I recognized it. Pastor Harlan. My stomach tightened. Mark's hand hovered near my back. I stepped forward and pushed the door open. My father and the pastor both froze. The office was cramped. Paper stacks, a cross on the wall, a coffee mug that smelled burnt. My father stood near the desk with his coat still on, like he'd come to control a crisis, not confess to one. He looked at me, then at Mark, and his face tightened into that familiar contempt. "Alone," he said. 1 word, a demand. "No," I said. 1 word, a boundary. Pastor Harlan cleared his throat. "Libby," he began, voice and soft. "I'm sorry for your loss." 8 words. I didn't bow to it. "You were the liaison," I said. 4 words. Direct. The pastor's eyes widened. My father's jaw clenched. "You went to the agency," my father snapped. 5 words. Accusation. I held his gaze. "You signed as liaison," I said. 5 words. Paper truth. He stepped closer, voice low. "Stop digging." 2 words. A threat. I didn't step back. "I'm filing," I said. 2 words. Final. The pastor lifted both hands slightly, palms out. Let's talk calmly. 3 words. Too late. My father leaned in, eyes hard. You'll shame your mother. 4 words. His favorite weapon. I felt something settle in my chest. Cold, clean, unmovable. You already did, I said. 4 words. Pastor Harlan swallowed. There are records, he said carefully. Things were handled. 6 words. A coward's confession. My father snapped his head toward him. Don't. 1 word. Panic. I watched that moment, the pastor flinching, my father commanding, and I understood the whole machine. The church wasn't a sanctuary. It was a lever. I turned to the pastor. Court will ask, I said. Answer there? 6 words. Calm. My father's nostrils flared. You won't win. 3 words. I met his eyes and kept my voice low. You won't hide. 3 words. I backed out of the office with Mark beside me, not because I was afraid, but because the next room needed witnesses bigger than stained glass. Outside, the wind cut hard across the steps. I tasted cold metal in my mouth like adrenaline. My phone buzzed again, an email from Nora Vance. Hearing set, County Courtroom 2B, 9:00 a.m. I stared at the words until they felt real. Public venue. A room where my father's reputation wouldn't protect him. A room where audio didn't care who he was in church. I slid my phone back into my pocket and felt the edge of the hospital bracelet through the tissue inside the envelope. Small plastic ridges against my thumb. Tomorrow, the truth wouldn't live in a hymnal anymore. It would live on the record. And my father, who built his power on silence, would have to face what silence finally costs. The night before the hearing, I ironed my dress blues like I was preparing for inspection, not court. The fabric released a faint heat and a clean metallic smell under the iron, and the sound of steam hissing felt oddly comforting. Simple physics, simple cause and effect. Mark sat at the kitchen table with Nora Vance's packets spread out in neat stacks, his pen circling dates, while the house settled around us with soft clicks in the walls. On the table, my mother's envelope stayed closed. I didn't need to keep opening the wound to remember it existed. I only needed to carry it to the right room. Nora called at 8:11 p.m. Her voice came through crisp, all business. We got the emergency slot. 5 words. I closed my eyes once. Courtroom 2B? 2 words. Yes, Nora said, and we have a preservation order. 6 words. Mark's shoulders loosened a fraction. Mine did too, but I didn't let it show in my voice. For the audio? 3 words. For everything, she said. Agency archive, intake notes, liaison logs. 7 words. The church's lever, finally pinned. I heard paper shifting on her end, then the small click of a keyboard. One more thing, she said. 3 words, my pulse tightened. I pulled the consent witness line, she continued. It lists a notary name. 9 words. My throat went dry. You found them? 3 words. I found the journal custodian, she said. They're bringing it. 9 words. Procedure turning into a weapon pointed the right way. After I hung up, Mark looked at me. He can't erase it. 5 words. I stared at the iron resting upright on its heel, steam fading. He'll try. 2 words. Outside, wind rattled bare branches against the window like impatient knuckles. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and warm cloth. I clipped my uniform jacket onto a hanger and ran my fingers once over the ribbons, my earned proof that I didn't fold when I was told to. My phone buzzed. A message from my father. Don't show tomorrow. 3 words. A command that still thought it owned me. I set the phone face down and slid Nora's speaking plan into the front of my binder. Mark's voice was low. Block him. 2 words. I didn't block him, I said. I documented him. 4 words. It felt like growth and grief at the same time. We left before dawn. The sky was still dark, and the cold air smelled like wet pavement and distant chimney smoke. Mark drove while I watched the road lines flash under the headlights, my binder heavy in my lap. Inside my coat pocket, the hospital bracelet pressed against my fingers through tissue, small plastic ridges reminding me this wasn't abstract. This was a person. At the county courthouse, the building rose pale and blunt against the early light, all stone and sealed windows. The steps were slick with frost. My shoes clicked as we climbed, a sharp sound in the quiet morning. Inside, the air was warm and stale, smelling of old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long. A metal detector beeped softly for someone ahead of us. A deputy's radio crackled once, dry static, and then settled. Nora met us near the hallway outside courtroom 2B, her bun tight, her eyes sharper than the fluorescent lights overhead. She carried a thin folder and a thicker calm. "You're early," she said. 2 words. "I was trained," I said. 3 words. My voice stayed even. Nora nodded once, then lowered her voice. "Your father filed a response." 6 words. My stomach tightened. "What kind?" 2 words. "He claims you consented," she said. "He claims you ran." 8 words. The town's favorite story, polished for court. Mark's jaw flexed. Nora didn't react. "We don't argue his story," she continued. "We show the fraud." 10 words. Evidence over emotion. She pointed down the hall. "Also, your mother's friend is here." 6 words. I turned and saw Mrs. Holloway sitting on a bench with her hands clasped around a worn purse. She looked smaller than she had in the church, but her eyes were steady. When she saw me, she stood with the same quiet resolve she'd had when she handed me that envelope. "Libby," she said. 1 word, soft. I walked to her and kept my voice low. "Thank you." 2 words, not enough, but honest. She swallowed, throat working. "Elaine made me promise." 4 words. "What did she say?" I asked. 4 words. Gentle. Mrs. Holloway's gaze flicked down the hall, checking for ears. "She said he'd lie forever." 5 words. My mother, seeing clearly. Nora stepped in with a form. "And Ms. Holloway," she said, "I need you to affirm 2 points." 9 words. Mrs. Holloway nodded once. "I will." 2 words. Nora's pen moved. "Did Elaine tell you the consent was forged?" 7 words. Mrs. Holloway's lips pressed tight. "Yes," she said. "She cried." 3 words. Simple, damning. "Did she tell you where she hid proof?" Nora asked. 8 words. "Yes," Mrs. Holloway said. "The hymnal." 2 words. A church hiding what it helped steal. Nora wrote without looking up. "Thank you." 2 words, professional, yet her tone softened a fraction. I backed away to the wall and breathed slowly. The hallway smelled like floor polish and breath held too long. Across from us, a drinking fountain gurgled once, loud in the silence. Then I felt it, the change in air before I saw him. My father appeared at the far end of the hall, walking with purpose like he owned the courthouse. He wore a black coat and that same righteous posture he used in church. Pastor Harlan walked beside him, head slightly bowed, hands clasped like he'd come to pray for the lie to survive. My father's eyes locked on me. He didn't hesitate. He marched straight toward me, stopping close enough that I caught his cologne, expensive, empty, over the courthouse smell. His voice dropped. "Take it back. Quick." 3 words. Panic dressed as command. I didn't move. "No." 1 word, boundary. His gaze flicked to my uniform. "You're still shame." 3 words. Short. Cruel. Mark stepped in by half a pace, not blocking, just present. My father's eyes darted to him with contempt. "Keep him out," my father said. 3 words. Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. I held my father's gaze. The court is public. 3 words, a warning. His jaw tightened. "You were a mistake." 4 words. The deepest cut, small and sharp. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "You were a choice." 4 words. Reality, reframed. His nostrils flared. I saved you. 3 words, his favorite myth. You saved yourself, I said. 3 words, not angry, accurate. Pastor Harlan finally spoke, voice thin. Libby, please. 2 words. Coward's plea. I looked at him, at the man who had called it dangerous behind a cracked office door. Answer under oath, I said. 4 words. Calm. The pastor's face went pale. My father leaned in, eyes hard. I'll bury you again. 4 words. Threat, dressed in certainty. I didn't flinch. You can't bury paper. 4 words. The only truth he couldn't bully. He stared at me for a beat, calculating. Then his expression snapped back into performance. He straightened his coat, smoothed his tie, and turned toward the courtroom doors as if we'd just discussed casserole recipes. Nora stepped between us, her voice clipped. Mr. Cole, no contact. 4 words. My father smiled without warmth. It's family. 2 words. Still trying to shrink law. Nora didn't blink. It's fraud. 2 words. The label he feared. He walked away, Pastor Harlan trailing behind like a shadow that didn't want to exist. The courtroom doors opened, and the bailiff called for parties to enter. The sound echoed down the hall, firm and indifferent. Inside, courtroom 2B smelled like wood varnish and old files. The benches were polished by generations of restless hands. A flag stood in the corner, still and bright, and I felt my uniform align with it. 2 symbols of duty, 1 chosen, 1 earned. My father sat at the front with his attorney, hands folded, face composed. Pastor Harlan sat behind him, eyes lowered. Across the aisle, Mrs. Holloway sat alone, shoulders square. Nora placed my binder on the table, opened it, and slid my mother's clear-sleeved copy into position, like a blade being set on a velvet cloth. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The room's movement was synchronized, but the silence that followed was personal. Heavy with the kind of attention my father always craved, now sharpened into scrutiny. We sat. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at the motion. This is an emergency petition, she said, voice steady, alleging forged consent in an adoption release. 14 words, clean, public, on the record. My father's attorney began with polished phrases about family conflict and regret, trying to turn the scandal into a misunderstanding. Nora stood when it was her turn and spoke like a door locking. This is not conflict, she said. This is forgery. 9 words. She submitted the signature comparison. She submitted the agency's flagged note. She submitted Mrs. Holloway's affidavit about my mother's confession and the hidden hymnal. Each exhibit landed with a soft slap of paper that sounded louder than it should have. Then Nora looked at the judge. We request the court compel production, she said, including the agency's recorded verification call. 13 words. My father's posture shifted just slightly, like a man who had heard thunder in the distance and realized he was standing in an open field. The judge nodded once. Granted, she said. Bring it. 5 words. My father's attorney objected, procedural, desperate, but the judge's expression didn't change. We are here for truth, the judge said, not reputation. 10 words. The room went still. The clerk wheeled in a small speaker on a cart, black, plain, unavoidable. Its cord coiled like a quiet threat. The bailiff placed it on a side table and tested the volume. A faint hiss of static filled the room. My eyes dropped to my coat pocket. The hospital bracelet pressed against my fingers through tissue, grounding me. Nora leaned close enough that only I could hear. When it plays, she murmured, don't look at him. 9 words. I swallowed once. Who do I look at? 6 words. Nora's voice stayed calm. Look at the judge. 3 words. Power shifted to the right place. The judge glanced at the clerk. Proceed. 1 word. The clerk's finger hovered over the play button, and my father, who had spent 20 years controlling the town's story, sat perfectly still, as if motion itself might convict him. The clerk pressed play. A thin hiss of static filled courtroom 2B, and the sound bounced off varnished wood like a warning. The overhead lights looked harsher suddenly, bleaching faces into the same tired color. I kept my hands folded on the table, fingers still, while the hospital bracelet in my coat pocket pressed its faint plastic ridges into my knuckles through the tissue. Small, stubborn proof that a person had existed even when my father pretended she hadn't. A woman's voice came through the speaker. Professional. Patient. Adoption Services Verification. Are you the liaison for this consent? Then a man answered. My father's voice, not similar, not close, exact, smooth, confident, familiar in the worst way. He sounded younger on the recording, but the cadence was the same one that had run my childhood. Certainty without conscience. Yes, the recording said, I'm the liaison. A sound moved through the room, chairs shifting, breath caught. Then everything fell into a heavier stillness. I didn't look at him. I looked at the judge, like Nora told me to, and watched her eyes tighten behind her glasses. The verification agent continued. For the record, the minor mother is Elizabeth Cole, age 16. My father's recorded voice gave a short laugh. She knows what she did. 5 words, and my stomach went cold anyway. The agent asked, Has the minor mother signed voluntarily? My father's voice didn't hesitate. She signed. 2 words, a lie delivered like a stamp. The agent said, We require the minor mother's presence or direct confirmation. My father's recorded voice turned sharper. She's not available. 3 words clipped. A pause on the audio, paper shuffling, a pen tapping. Then the agent asked, Why is she not available? My father's voice answered, breezy as weather. She ran off. 3 words, and I felt the lie he'd fed the town settle into the courtroom like smoke. The judge's gaze flicked briefly toward my father's table, then back to the speaker. The courtroom held its breath. The agent said, Sir, coercion is a serious concern. My father's recorded voice scoffed softly. Discipline isn't coercion. 3 words. My skin went tight over my ribs. Then another voice entered the recording, older, thinner. Pastor Harlan. He sounded cautious even then, like a man afraid of his own reflection. We prayed on it, the pastor's recorded voice said. It's best. 6 words, and my throat burned. A murmur threatened to rise in the gallery and died instantly under the judge's stare. It became something else. Silence. Dense, judgmental, total. The kind of silence that didn't protect anyone. The kind that exposed. The agent's voice sharpened. Pastor, are you physically witnessing this consent? Pastor Harlan's voice hesitated. I'm here. 3 words. The agent said, And the minor mother is present? My father's voice cut in. She won't show. 3 words, impatient. The agent replied, Then we cannot proceed. On the recording, my father exhaled like a man inconvenienced. Proceed anyway. 2 words. A few people in the benches shifted, a restrained ripple of disbelief. The wood creaked. Someone's breath hitched. Then the silence returned, heavier, almost punitive. The agent said, Sir, we need to speak to the minor mother. My father's voice dropped lower, controlled. She's a disgrace. 3 words. A knife I'd heard before I had a uniform. The agent said, That is not an answer. My father's recorded voice followed, smooth and final. I'm her father. 4 words. Ownership disguised as blood. Then came the sound that made my stomach turn fully cold, a pen scratching on paper, faint but unmistakable, captured by the phone microphone like a confession you could hear. The agent asked, Who is signing as the minor mother? A pause, half a heartbeat. My father answered, almost amused. I am. 2 words. The courtroom didn't react with gasps or shouting. It reacted with that same disciplined silence, like a collective spine straightening. The judge's face went very still. The clerk's hands hovered near the controls, unsure whether to stop. The judge didn't tell her to. The truth was doing its work. Pastor Harlan's recorded voice returned, smaller now. Robert? One word warning. My father's voice on the audio dismissed him. Be quiet. 2 words, and I saw the mechanism clearly. Command, flinch, compliance. The agent's voice turned hard. That is fraud. 3 words, clean, unforgiving. My father's recorded voice gave a short, contemptuous laugh. She won't notice, Gosaches. 3 words. The recording clicked off. No one moved for a second. The silence in the courtroom felt physical, like pressure against my eardrums. My pulse thudded steady, but my posture stayed straight, hands still, eyes on the judge. The judge didn't look at me. She looked at my father's attorney, then at my father, then back to her notes as if she needed one extra breath to keep fury from becoming bias. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, clipped. Mr. Cole? 2 words. A summons. My father's attorney stood too quickly. Your Honor, this audio... The judge cut him off with a raised hand. Sit. 1 word. He sat. My father remained seated, face arranged into a mask of disbelief, as if disbelief could erase a voice. The judge's gaze held him. Did you say, I am? 6 words. The question sounded simple. It was lethal. My father swallowed. His jaw worked. Then he tried to lift his chin the way he did in church. The righteous posture without righteousness. That could be anyone, he said. 3 words. Thin. The judge's expression didn't change. It is a lender-grade archive call. 7 words, precise, Nora stood. And it matches his prior recorded speech, she said. We can submit comparison. I have 14 words, but she delivered them like a file number. My father's attorney started again. Objection. The judge's eyes narrowed. Overruled. 1 word. My father's mouth tightened. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered something I didn't catch. His hands shook once, then stilled as he forced them to obey him. The judge turned slightly toward the clerk. Mark this exhibit as admitted. 7 words. Then she looked at Nora. Your petition is granted. 5 words, and the air shifted. Granted. Not sympathy, not comfort. A legal door opening. The judge continued, voice even. The record is hereby unsealed for the limited purpose of identifying the child's placement and reviewing the validity of consent. 21 words, long, formal, and finally aimed in the right direction. My throat tightened, and I pressed my fingertips together under the table until the bracelet ridges in my pocket reminded me to breathe. My father's attorney stood again, desperation leaking through professionalism. Your Honor, this is a family matter. 7 words. The judge's gaze sharpened. This is not family. 4 words. She tilted her head toward the bailiff. We will refer this to the district attorney. 11 words. The room stayed silent, but the silence had changed. Less shock now, more certainty. Pastor Harlan shifted on the bench behind my father. His face had gone pale, eyes fixed on the flag in the corner as if he were begging cloth for forgiveness. The judge's eyes flicked toward him. Pastor Harlan. 2 words. He jerked slightly, caught. Yes, Your Honor. 3 words, too small. Remain available, she said. Your role is under review. 10 words. Pastor Harlan's throat bobbed. He nodded once without lifting his eyes. My father finally stood, abrupt, chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound cracked the silence like a whip. Several heads turned. The bailiff took 1 step closer, calm, ready. My father's voice rose, sharp and wounded. This is a witch hunt! 4 words, loud enough for the gallery. The judge's eyes stayed steady. Sit down. 2 words. He didn't. He actually pointed toward me. She's doing this for attention. 6 words. The old strategy, make me the problem. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I looked at the judge like Nora said, because the judge was the only person in that room who could turn truth into action. The judge's gaze cut to him. You forged a minor's consent. 7 words. A sentence that didn't care how loud he got. My father's face twisted. I saved this town embarrassment. 6 words. Confession disguised as pride. The judge's voice dropped, colder. You harmed a child. 4 words, that landed. Not with noise, because the courtroom still held silence, but with a collective stillness so complete I could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights and the slow scratch of the clerk's pen. My father's shoulders sagged for the first time in my memory. It wasn't remorse. It was the weight of a lie finally having witnesses who didn't need his approval. Nora rose again, calm. Your Honor, we request an order for immediate release of identifying placement information to my client and counsel. 14 words, clean. The judge nodded once. Granted. 1 word. My vision blurred at the edges, not from tears spilling, but from pressure, like a dam holding. The judge looked directly at me for the first time. Her voice softened by a fraction, not sentiment. Gravity. Ms. Cole Reyes. 3 words. Yes, Your Honor, I said. 3 words. Steady. You will receive the information through counsel, she said, and you will be afforded privacy protections in this process. 18 words, and I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Protection that didn't require me to beg. My father made a sound, half scoff, half choke. She doesn't deserve... The judge snapped her gaze back to him. Enough. 1 word. The bailiff stepped closer. Sir, he said quietly. 1 word, gentle and firm. My father's hands curled into fists, then opened again when he realized fists meant nothing here. He lowered himself into the chair as if the air had become heavier, as if gravity had finally remembered him. The judge began issuing directives, dates, filings, referrals, each one a nail sealing the story shut. I listened, but my mind kept circling one phrase from the audio like a bell tolling. I am. 2 words that stole 20 years. When the judge adjourned, the gavel hit wood with a sharp crack, and the sound broke the courtroom's spell. People began to move, quiet murmurs, shifting coats, benches creaking. But the silence didn't evaporate. It followed my father, clinging to him like smoke. As Nora gathered papers, she leaned close. We have the placement name, she murmured. We get it today. 10 words. My heart punched hard once, then steadied. Mark's hand touched my elbow, warm through fabric. You did it, he said. 3 words. I didn't look back at my father. I didn't need to. The scandal had finally left the church and entered the record, where it couldn't be sung away. I stood, uniform crisp, and felt the hospital bracelet ridges press against my fingers again. Small plastic proof, still waiting. Outside the courtroom doors, my father's attorney spoke urgently to him in low tones. My father's face stayed tight, eyes flicking toward me with a hatred that felt smaller now, boxed in by law. Pastor Harlan avoided everyone's eyes as he slipped away down the hall, shoulders hunched like a man trying to shrink into wallpaper. Nora guided us toward the clerk's window to request the certified order. The hallway smelled of floor polish and stale coffee. Paperwork slid under glass. Stamps hit pages. Thunk, thunk. Each stamp a sound of the world finally believing me. As the clerk handed Nora the sealed copy, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. A new email from Nora's paralegal. Subject line stark and unbelievable. Placement identified. Name attached. My breath caught. Mark glanced at me. Lib? 1 word, careful. I stared at the screen without opening it yet because I could feel the weight of what waited inside. Another life, another door, another kind of truth. And somewhere behind us, I heard my father's chair scrape again. Fast this time, followed by hurried footsteps, as if he suddenly remembered there was one more thing he could still try to control. I heard my father's chair scrape again, fast, followed by hurried footsteps, like he'd suddenly remembered there was one more lever he could still pull. The courthouse hallway smelled of floor polish and stale coffee, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look slightly guilty. Nora and Mark walked a step ahead of me toward the clerk's window, papers in hand. I stayed half a step behind, eyes forward, posture set. Then my father's voice cut through the corridor. Libby. One word, too sharp. I didn't turn right away. I let his urgency hit the back of my uniform like rain and slide off. He came up beside me, breathing harder than he wanted anyone to notice. His coat was still buttoned. His jaw worked like it was chewing glass. Give me your phone, he said. 4 words. Command. Panicked. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw how small he was without a pulpit, without the town's soft nods, without my old fear. No, I said. 1 word. Locked. His eyes flicked to Nora's folder, then back to my face. You're going to destroy me. 4 words. Still about him. I kept my voice low. You destroyed a child. 4 words. Simple. True. His nostrils flared. He stepped closer, too close, and the cologne hit me again. Expensive and empty. That baby was a stain. 5 words. The cruelty he saved for privacy. My chest tightened, but I didn't let it change my face. My fingers found the hospital bracelet through the tissue in my coat pocket, the plastic ridges biting lightly into my knuckles. Say her name, I said. 3 words. He blinked, caught for a fraction, then hardened. I don't know it. 4 words. Lie or cowardice. Nora's heels stopped. Mark's body shifted slightly, protective. The bailiff at the courtroom door glanced over, eyes narrowing, reading the tension the way officers always did. My father saw the attention and adjusted fast, grief mask back on. He lowered his voice, trying to sound reasonable. This is family. 3 words. Shrink it, hide it. I answered calmly. This is fraud. 3 words. Label, not argument. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked past me toward the clerk's window where Nora was receiving the certified order. He saw the stamp hit paper. Thunk. And his eyes tightened like the sound physically hurt. He leaned in again, whispering now. You don't want this. 4 words. Threat disguised as advice. I kept my gaze steady. I already have it. 5 words. Truth. Record. Momentum. His hand twitched toward my coat pocket. Small, instinctive, as if he could grab the bracelet and crush the past back into silence. Mark's voice dropped, controlled. Don't touch her. 3 words. My father froze. The bailiff took 2 steps closer, not rushing, just arriving. His radio crackled faintly at his shoulder, a dry static that sounded like consequence. Sir, the bailiff said, step back. 2 words. Final. My father's lips pressed thin. He forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. We're talking. 2 words. Weak. Step back, the bailiff repeated. 2 words. He didn't change. My father moved a half step away, just enough to pretend he'd chosen it. His eyes stayed locked on me, sharp with hatred and fear. You think you're better, he hissed. 3 words. Old poison. I let my voice stay quiet. I'm free. 2 words. A new truth. That did it. Not because it insulted him, but because it removed him. His face tightened, and for a second his mask slipped, raw, petty rage exposed under the courthouse lights. You were dead to me, he said. 5 words. He tried to resurrect the old spell. I didn't flinch. I outlived your sentence. 5 words. Calm. Surgical. The hallway seemed to pause around us. People walking past slowed without meaning to. A woman with a file tucked to her chest glanced over, then kept going, eyes forward, like she didn't want to be involved but couldn't unsee it. The bailiff's presence held the air in place. The public didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They watched in heavy, judging silence. My father swallowed, then straightened his coat, rebuilding pride with his hands. This isn't finished, he said. 3 words, a last grasp. I nodded once, not in agreement. Acknowledgement. No, I said. It's recorded. 3 words. The only ending he deserved. He stared at me for a beat longer, then turned sharply and walked away down the hall, shoulders stiff, moving fast like speed could erase sound. Pastor Harlan trailed behind him at a distance, face pale, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Mark. He looked like a man trying not to be seen by God. Nora came back to us with the certified order in her hand. She didn't waste time on emotion. "Let's go," she said. 2 words. We walked out into the cold morning air. The sky was pale and hard. The wind smelled like wet asphalt and winter metal. My breath came out in a steady fog. In the parking lot, Nora stopped beside our car and opened her email on her phone. "We have the placement identity," she said. 5 words. Her voice stayed neutral, but her eyes softened a fraction. My heart punched once, hard, then steadied, like it had learned discipline from my uniform. Mark's hand hovered near my back without touching. He let me choose the moment. Nora angled her phone toward me and scrolled. "You don't have to look yet," she said. 6 words. I stared at the screen anyway because I had lived too long with not knowing. The attached file opened into lines of text, names, dates, agency codes, and then the one line that made my throat close. A name. Not baby girl Cole. A real name. I didn't say it out loud. I couldn't. It felt sacred and dangerous at the same time, like touching a live wire with bare skin. My fingers tightened around the tissue in my pocket until the bracelet ridges pressed into my palm. Nora spoke carefully. "She's an adult now," she said. "There are steps. We do this respectfully." 10 words. Procedure with dignity. Mark's voice was low. "Whatever she wants." 3 words. The right kind of love. I swallowed once, slow. The cold air scraped my throat. "I won't ambush her," I said. 4 words. A promise to the person my father tried to erase. Nora nodded. "Good," she said. "We start with a letter through counsel." 8 words. I looked back toward the courthouse doors. They stood there blunt and indifferent, as if they hadn't just held my father's voice up to the light. 20 years ago, he had used a church to make my life disappear. Today, a courtroom had made it reappear, quietly, formally, in ink. I climbed into the passenger seat beside Mark. The heater warmed slowly, blowing air that smelled faintly of dust. Mark didn't start driving right away. He waited until my breathing matched my heartbeat. I pulled the hospital bracelet out of my pocket and held it in my hand. Plastic. Light. Faded. It clicked softly against my wedding ring when my fingers shifted. A tiny sound. A huge existence. Mark glanced at it, then back to the road, giving me privacy inside the car. "I kept this," I said. 2 words. Not proud, reverent. He nodded once. "She mattered," he said. 2 words. The truth I'd needed at 16. We drove home in quiet. The town passed by, gas station, hardware store, the diner with the same peeling sign, places that had watched me become a rumor. Snow threatened in the sky but didn't commit. The light stayed flat, honest. When we pulled into my mother's driveway, the house looked the same, small and stubborn. The wind pushed dead leaves across the porch in a dry whisper. I stood there for a moment before unlocking the door, fingers on the key like it was a vow. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old wood and lemon cleaner. The quiet wasn't lonely the way it used to be. It was mine. At the kitchen table, I opened my binder and slid the certified court order into a clear sleeve. Paper crackled. Plastic whispered. A new kind of protection. Then I placed the hospital bracelet beside my mother's letter. Daisy, bracelet, uniform, proof. I sat down and let my shoulders drop for the first time in days. My hands trembled once, then steadied as I picked up a pen. I didn't write to my father. I wrote to the person he tried to make nameless. I kept it short. No guilt, no demand, no story that forced her to carry my pain, just truth, offered with dignity. My pen scratched softly on paper, steady as a heartbeat. When I finished, I signed my name the way it had always been, my hand, my pressure, my slant. Nobody else's. Mark stood behind me, close enough that I felt his warmth, far enough that he didn't claim the moment. "You okay?" he asked. 2 words. I stared at the letter and felt the answer settle into place, not comfort, not closure, but something clean. "I'm honest," I said. 2 words. Outside, the wind eased. The house made its small, settling sounds, pipes ticking, wood shifting, as if it could finally stop bracing for my father's keys at the counter. I slid the letter into an envelope and sealed it, pressing the flap down with my thumb until it held. Then I took the daisy from my mother's funeral arrangement, one I'd saved, petals slightly wilted, and placed it in a glass of water by the window. The flower leaned toward the light anyway. I stood there for a moment, looking at it, and felt the moral land with quiet certainty. Truth outlives pride.